Hello, everyone. Just wanted to see if I can see anyone logging on. If there's any comments coming through. Fantastic. Oh, we've got 6 people viewing. Hi, Tim. Hi, Emma. Welcome, everyone. It's yes, good to see you all here in the Grove. Feel free to pull up a tree stump or a log or a patch of earth upon which to sit and just settle down for sort of a bit of a chat about community and Druidry. I've got my tea here, so I hope you've got yours as well. We've got, Slovakia, my goodness. Oregon, hello. Skegness, fantastic. New Zealand. Gosh, wow. What a wide range of places we're all from. Anyway, so first of all, I suppose I'll introduce myself. My name is Dr. Jonathan Woolley. I am a member of the Order. I joined about 10 years ago now, and I've got a sort of a background in social anthropology, and I've actually done some studies on Druidic communities and how they form and how they work, and I've actually done a little bit of research on that in my work as a scholar. But I'm also a member of OBOD and I'm a practitioner of Druidry myself as well. So I've sort of just, as you'll see, I'm quite brown, I'm quite red in patches as well. I've just come from a really lovely weekend outdoors with my Druidic community for Solstice Camp, where a group of us all gathered together on the Vale of the White Horse, so just in this little valley below this sort of thousands and thousands of years old chalk carving of a great horse. It's believed to date from the Iron Age, at the time of the ancient Druids. And we camped there overnight for a few nights. And after seeing the sun come up over Avebury, a bunch of us went down to this field and spent some time there together in community, working with ritual, working with communing with the spirits of the land, and also spending time with each other, with like-minded people. And it's about community that I'd really like to talk about today. It's, as I've said, it's been an academic interest of mine for quite some time, understanding how Druids interact with each other and how Druidic spirituality shapes those interactions moving forward, and what kind of society Druidry develops. And I think I'm going to do something very sort of perhaps controversial now, and I'm going to disagree with Ronald Hutton, because Professor Ronald Hutton, who's a very eminent historian of many forms of paganism, once gave a speech, a talk at a Druid gathering many years ago now, and was asked to speak on the topic of what Druidry is for. And this notion of what Druidry is kind of prompted him to sort of say, well, Druidry isn't really for anything. It doesn't really have to be for anything. It can just be a sort of, it can be something that's worthwhile in its own sake. And I don't sort of disagree with that per se, but I would say that doesn't necessarily mean that Druidry doesn't necessarily serve a kind of purpose for us, that people don't come to it for a reason, that it feeds us and it feeds society in some kind of way. And that certainly is going to be the focus of what I'm going to talk about this evening over tea, as we're all gathered here in the Grove from many places around the world. And so essentially what one of the things that made me think about this disagreement that I have with Ronald is something that a good friend of mine, Tim Harris, brought to this sort of solstice camp, this sort of little campsite that we forged together over the weekend, and amidst lounging in the sunshine and sleeping under the stars and conducting rituals at ancient long barrows, we also came together and had a meeting to sort of plan out what we wanted to do over that weekend. Kept things very simple. But when we introduced ourselves and we sort of went round and said who we all were and where we'd all sort of come from, Tim suggested that everybody say what their needs were. And I think it's that question of need that, for me, one of the most important needs that I have when approaching Druidry is a need for community, is a need for connecting with others, and a need to sort of find other like-minded people who share the same sort of proclivity for the worship of trees, as Andy Letcher put it in one of his songs, and had that sort of affection for nature that takes on a profound spiritual dimension, alongside a fascination for the old stories and desire to use ritual. And those things, being around people who share those values and those passions, is really, really important for me. And so I was really pleased to hear many other people in that circle all say the same thing, that they were there. One of their key things, in addition to actually practicing ritual and pursuing their druidic path, they were also there for community. And so, you know, through this very effective, what ultimately that asking people what their needs were was very effective as a way of generating community, because we all found areas of overlap that kind of brought us together. And so it actually ended up making that, you know, what I found really powerful was that actually helped strengthen the time we spent together and strengthen our sense of bond, so that even though I think initially perhaps we might have felt a little bit burdened by the stresses and strains of the world, we all came together and found this sort of space. But that then raises the question, and you know, one of the things that actually, you know, as I say, burdened by the world, it's a real reality for many of us that our world today doesn't really cater to our need for community, our appetite for connection with others and with the natural world. I'm using community here in a sense to sort of look beyond merely connections with other human beings, and a much broader sense of community, which I think Druidry is really excellent for allowing. Which basically is a sense that trees and plants and stones and the dead and other spiritual beings can also be a part of our community and are a part of our communities, and that it's important for us to acknowledge that. So, you know, it's that sense of community that I think is what we all strongly need, but our world doesn't really provide it. So the question I would ask then is and I'm going to kind of quickly summarize through making it in the remainder of this talk before we move on to a short meditation, is looking at what the druidic relationship with community is. What is it that Druidry can offer that need that we all have for community, and how does Druidry sort of cater to that and support that? So first of all, as probably evidenced by the fact that I've just come back from a druidic community space, I find that Druidry actually has great potential as a sort of a spirituality of community. You can see this if you look at historical precedent. Certainly the ancient Druids acted in service of a wider community. They acted to kind of form connections with the gods and act on their community's behalf and mediate between conflicts. They served a whole host of really important roles within the Celtic societies of northwestern Europe. And even if you look at the Druidry of the Revival era and the kind of civic nationalism that Wales that Wales has today, which Druidry plays a key role. The Welsh Gorsedd, for example, is a system of honours that are accorded to people who've achieved great things in Welsh culture, and you can see that there is that kind of community focus there. And this is sometimes quite, and this I would suggest is quite different from many other wings of the Western mystery tradition. It sort of sets Druidry apart because particularly things like witchcraft and certain forms of Western mystery schools is their work in very small groups of people, or indeed you are practiced individually. Which is not to say that if you're a witch you can't pursue community, but it's just that I would say it's a question of emphasis, that within the Druidic tradition there's always been this stronger tendency towards looking outward. It's sometimes said that Druidry is done in the sun, whereas witchcraft is done under moonlight, and moonlight affords a certain degree of secrecy, whereas doing your rituals in a public place under the sun means you're in public. And that publicity that's kind of naturally accorded to Druids tends to ensure that we seek to help others and to provide them with a sense of community. And in various ways, whether or not that's through officiating at rituals or advising on legal disputes or whatever. So there is a certain sense, I would say, and I've often said privately that for me, Druidry in a sense is a little bit like witchcraft in public, or indeed witchcraft perhaps for the public. That in a sense you can actually take many of the things that witches do in sort of private and secret, and many of those same energies can be channeled in a sort of a much more social direction, and you're kind of facing towards human society rather than facing towards the spiritual world, as witches more often do. Naturally, both Druids and witches do both, but I think, as soon as where Druidry faces the other world most strongly in the ovate grade, it overlaps most strongly with Wicca and witchcraft. And often when witchcraft faces most strongly into serving the community, the role of the herbalist, of the wise woman, of the advisor, of the midwife, and so on, that's actually where it overlaps with the ovate. And so I think there's something quite important in that connection. So Druidry has a great deal to offer community, in my opinion, and that certainly for me is very, in my reading of Druidry, is very much at the core of what it does. Certainly the emphasis upon peaceable relations, upon connecting with nature, it speaks to our desire to form meaningful connections and solidarity with others. And it's also very pertinent to this time that we're in now, where social tension and siloing, where different groups refuse to speak to each other and debates become polarized, and that our world is damaged by war and racism and ecocide and many other forms of really divisive and damaging social practice. These things clearly do cause clearly there's a need for community. Clearly that need for community is coming from somewhere, and it's spiritualities like Druidry that, with their emphasis upon peace and solidarity, clearly have a lot to offer. But I'd also say that there's also a lot to do, because Druidry, and this is really my second point, for the past 50 years, I think, a great deal of focus in Druidry has been exploring it as a philosophy or as a mystery school that provides a source of personal development and spiritual growth. And that was tremendously needed throughout that period, and continues to be really important, and I think is a powerful strength of Druidry. And most Druids you meet, reflecting this potential for community, then take that personal growth that they've experienced and take it out into the world and offer it to others. And indeed, this is the focus of the Druid grade. And I know many members of friends of mine, members of the Druidic community, who I know from White Horse camps and from Solstice camp, who have become great poets and great conservationists, great educators, great healers through their Druidic practice. But what I've often found is sort of perhaps has received a bit less attention, perhaps, is the concept of what Druidry's own community might look like, how it might be organised, how a grove might work, how to form a grove, how different groves interact with each other. That's an area that I think there's still a great more potential to be done, particularly in this time when we're beset by ecocide and difficulty. And I think there's a key consideration, this is my third point, that we need to bear in mind when exploring that potential of Druidry, and this new and exciting area of how our groves can work together to create stronger community in and of themselves. And that is that not everyone can become an initiate of a mystery school, and not everyone wants to. Some people, like friends of friends, family, spouses, may not be inclined in that way, and yet we may want to involve them in our community spaces like camps or in our groves. Also, it's important to remember that people like children, for example, you can't become a member of the order until you are, I think it's 18 or 16. And so that means that if we want to involve our children in Druidic practice and make Druidry available to young people, there needs to be a different set of customs being made available, a different set of resources made available than courses and so forth. So we need to look beyond the idea of membership when thinking about our community. And indeed, this makes me think of an example from my time spent with Hindu friends of mine. And indeed, one of them asked me, how do you involve children in Druidry? How are Druidic children participate? How do they participate in the community? And this is something I'd very much like to hear about in the comments. So please do place a comment if you have examples of how you've done this, how you've involved your family in your Druidry. And I think this just sort of, and for my Hindu friends, involving children is really, really key. And it's absolutely fundamental to the continuity of Hinduism as a living tradition. And I'd love to see more of that same thing in Druidry. I already see the beginnings of it within our community, but I think there's even more potential in the road ahead. And I think we can all pursue that together. Because as far as I'm concerned, the world needs Druidic communities and places where people can become learners and can participate in it in whatever degree is appropriate for them, regardless of whether they want a full-blown initiation or if they just want to be, sort of they just want to sort of dip in here and there to sort of recharge their batteries and feel a bit stronger to go off and do whatever good works they're doing in the world. So that's what I would like to see, and that's I guess my challenge that I set myself whenever I'm organising community activities, but also therefore a sort of a challenge if you would like to accept it. But I'd like to sort of share more widely with the people here gathered in the Grove. That leaves us a little bit of time to close, and I'd like to sort of leave you with a particular example of community building that's going on outside of Druidry that I think has a huge amount of lessons for OBOD and other Druidic groups that might seek to strengthen community in of themselves. And that is the work of Starhawk and the reclaiming community in the on the west coast of California. Starhawk in particular has written a screenplay based on her book, The Fifth Sacred Thing, which hinges on a utopian imagining of San Francisco in a city which is sustainable and magical and spiritually and socially progressive. And so it's a really wonderful story, and it's a beautiful vision of what the world could be like, or aspects of the world could be like. So one of the things that and what they're hoping to do is they're hoping to produce a series of TV episodes based on this, like a TV miniseries, a kind of HBO miniseries. And what they're wanting to do is they're wanting to use the money that would be spent on creating sets and employing extras and so on to actually do urban regeneration projects and create community gardens across San Francisco. So essentially to turn San Francisco as is into the San Francisco of the art envisioned in the story, which I think is this wonderful life imitating art, creativity, creating positive change in the lives of ordinary people, which is profoundly Druidic in my mind, and I think is something that I find very inspiring. And one thing that they've asked to do, and I'd ask that we all do very quickly, is that we, or at least not too quickly, is to envision a green light, because obviously they're trying to get this script greenlit at the moment within Hollywood. And what I would encourage all of you to do is to sort of settle into your seat, and we'll have a brief meditation where I'll conjure the image of San Francisco in The Fifth Sacred Thing and encourage us all to envision a green light that could also be applied to our own lives and our own work in forging community. So please settle down into your seat bones and take a couple of deep breaths. One for the earth, one for the sky, and one for the waters around us. And I invite you to become aware of your feet and imagine them resting on a mossy forest floor of the sacred grove of the Order in which we are all gathered. See your fellow Druids around you and any others who may have been invited here who may wish to participate. Feel their presence. Feel yourself relax and become steady, aware of your body, but also aware of the otherworldly grove in which we are all currently sitting. And I invite you to see in the center of that grove a vision of a city. A city whose layout may be familiar to some of you if you've ever been to San Francisco, with its Golden Gate Bridge, its beautiful houses. But unlike the San Francisco of today, the roads are replaced with paths and gardens growing food for the people. Streamers and wind turbines dot the skyline. Bright colors and music drift up to you from the cityscape below. And all around you, you can hear the flowing of water. Clear streams allowed to flow free under the sky. You notice that sky is crossed by silvery skyboats, a sustainable form of transport, bringing people from one neighborhood to the other. This city is a vision of sustainability, of harmony, and of the 5 sacred things: water, earth, air, fire, and spirit. Now I invite you to feel as though you're being passed a green light, as though one of the other druids in the circle has handed it to you. And you hold it briefly between your fingers, and you offer that green light some blessing or a bit more energy from whatever sources of power and strength and nourishment you draw upon. Be they gods, ancestral spirits, elemental forces, nature itself, or the source of all things. And when you are ready, I'd like you to send that green light towards the image of the shining city. And as it glances by, you feel that city become a little more real, a little more three-dimensional, a little closer to reality. I'd also invite you to turn your attention to a project of your own, where you are also building community. It could be an allotment, a witch house, your own sacred grove, or a camp. And allow some of that positive green light to fall on something you need to happen in your community, for your community to flourish. And when you are ready, pass the green light on to another druid beside you in the sacred grove. The light a little stronger, a little brighter than it was before. And now I invite you back into your body, as your awareness of the great city begins to fade. And your awareness of the sacred grove begins to settle as you become aware of your physical body, the room in which you are standing or sitting, and your feet planted firmly on the ground. And have a stretch. Open your eyes if you close your eyes. Bring yourself back into this room, this place. Welcome back, everybody. Hopefully you saw something rather nice, and it gave you some energy to make the green light shine on whatever projects you're working on to create community in your spaces. I think that's all we have time for on Tea with the Druids. I hope you've not minded my wittering on too much. I'm seeing a few hearts and likes popping up there in the corner, so clearly a few of you have liked what I've got to say anyway. But it's been really lovely, and I've been really honoured to come and talk to you all this evening. And I wish you all the best with whatever it is that you're doing to strengthen community, either within Druidry or outside of Druidry, in the months and weeks and years to come. And I'll make sure to read all of your comments and respond below. And I'm looking forward to that. So please do write down anything that you'd like me to see, and I'll make sure I get in touch with you. And if you'd like to find out more about anything I've mentioned, so Solstice Camp or White Horse Camps or the Fifth Sacred Thing, I'll put some links in a comment here on this video, and so you can find them. Cool. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Have a really wonderful evening or day or whatever it is there, wherever you are. And I'm sure I will see you all again soon in the actual world or the virtual world or the other world, whichever happens first. Bright blessings and happy solstice.